Welcome back to Unplug from Worldly Thinking. In tonight's episode, we are going to discuss how to become experientially healed. And for anybody who's been suffering from any type of, past hurt, past trauma, past loss, this is definitely the type of video you want to watch. With me is my co-host Patrick. How's it going, Patrick?
Doing well, man. Busy finishing up a new project I've been working on the side. Just kind of a new audio side income thing. So super excited about that and busy with that on my end. But it's been really good. How about yourself?
Doing well, doing well. Just celebrated the wife's birthday with you guys, and that was a good time.
It's
Appreciate you
very
guys coming over and doing that, and don't want to take up too much time like we do on our other channel, so we'll get right into this teaching on how to become experientially healed. If you're watching live on this premiere, Patrick or I will probably be in the live chat. If not, feel free to leave your comments below. Patrick and I will get back to them. And of course, if you have questions or if you want to, set up a time to chit chat about any of this stuff, we're always welcome to do those type of things on Zoom, Discord, those type of applications to be able to have connection. But let's go ahead and get started on how to become experientially healed.
Sounds good.
All right, we call this a time to heal because a time to heal is now. It's not in the future. It's not 1 year from now. It's not 5 years from now. It's about now. So let's define what healing really is first. We're going to talk about biological healing, chemical healing, and in our opinion, and most importantly, experiential healing. So, healing, as defined by Merriam Webster, to make free from injury or disease, to make well again, to restore to original purity or integrity, to get back to kind of where you were before whatever was so harmful or hurtful took place. I like to define it as to be completely transformed and renewed to enter a state of being that is both peaceful and patient in any and every circumstance. Like in circumstances that would make somebody not feel peace or not feel patient, and you don't have that sense of calmness or security, and you're getting triggered by things, that's not being healed. So if you wondered, am I healed? Am I not healed? That's kind of your litmus test. If you can sit there and experience a state of peace and patience in a situation that would make people not peaceful or patient, then that's kind of like letting you know kind of where you're at. So it's just a good rule of thumb of, hey, there's still more you can learn and more you can develop or more you can heal from that's going on in your inner state of being.
Sure. It's definitely nice to kind of break it out to be more of I guess, of a black and white term, and rather rather than keeping it such a ambiguous thing. Because I think it's nice just to have an actual barometer of where do we stand. And I'll say before we jump into really any in-depth stuff in this teaching, um, if you find yourself on that scale and it's you know, you aren't healed or you aren't this, you aren't that. Like we talked about in a previous teaching, to practice positivity. And I kind of want to keep that a theme through all of these teachings. So I'm just going to kind of bring it back to that. It's like, if you're not at that place, that's okay. You're taking a great step here to begin that process and to, start to view the world a different way. And as you go through these teachings and as you think about these things, try to always keep it in a positive light. Try not to make it a bad thing. And we'll get into more of that in a minute.
Well, and I think that some people, if we're saying you're either healed or you're not, they take offense to it, and because they believe, oh,
Sure.
it takes time to heal, and I just haven't had enough time. And a lot of times, it's you don't have the right tools, you don't have the right. Nobody's given you the correct skills to do these things. They haven't given you the right methods to go through these things. They've given you band-aids to put on whatever it is that you're coping with or dealing with. That's either horrific or traumatic in its nature. And I'm not
Right.
saying that what you're going through isn't real. It very much is. We're just saying that there's a better way of doing it, and this is the way. And this is the way because it works, it's effective, and it's not just for the moments in the past, it's for the moments to come, no matter what they are. It's
Sure.
about transforming your inner state of being so that it's healthy in its nature. Whereas usually when things had happened to us in the past, we were susceptible to them being much more traumatic and much more horrific than if we were healthier in that specific moment in time. Yeah, it's bad that whatever happened, and it is a, whether it be something that's criminal in its offense or whether it's something that's lost in its offense or whether it's something that's just cruel or malicious or neglectful. yeah, we're not justifying what happened to somebody. We're not saying
Sure.
that what happened to you is even your fault, because it isn't. What we're saying is if we are healthier in our nature, it doesn't have the same effect on us, both now and in the future. And then if it has happened, here's the steps and the processes and the things that are available to help you heal completely, not just help you better cope with the ongoing and agonizing level of trauma or negativity. So
Right.
just trying to
That,
clarify that, because I think that a lot of people get confused in thinking that, you know, we're offering like a magic shot or a magic, way of doing something. It isn't, and we're all
sure.
for the different types of healings. And, we're going to get into biological and chemical healing. And we're also going to get into experiential healing, which does have some cognitive flavor to it, but it's healthy and it's important and it's vital if you truly want to be free from the things that you've been suffering from.
Right. And I just bounce off that, just like the ultimate goal of this. And we talked about, I think our first series, our first teaching on this is ultimately is give you tools to just take back control of your life, or we don't like to use the word control
But
around here, but
manage it.
really,
No, to
yeah,
manage it.
really to manage it and free you from, even if it's just a little bit to start, some of the stressors that have constantly bothered you throughout your life. Even if you can remove those a little bit, wouldn't that be great to start the process?
Absolutely.
You don't have to buy everything outright from the get-go. I get that. But even to start implementing these steps and start making progress and having little um, successes along the way, like that wouldn't that be awesome for you to experience in your life?
Right. And with this teaching, this is an overall broad viewpoint of healing, and it's very foundational in its nature. But also, we're going to get into specific things like, being free from anger and being free from depression and being free from anxiety and being free from stress. And all of those things contribute to somebody being unhealthy or not healing. So this is kind of like a foundational teaching, and we'll get into more specific stuff with each of those four areas so that they can become more focused. And we can even do future shows to where if it's a specific type of situation, like, somebody's dealing with PTSD from war, somebody's dealing from PTSD from abuse, those are types of things that we can get more specific on, and more things of, how do you cognitively frame those things in a healthy way to help you heal quicker.
Sure.
So let's get into the biological impairments that people suffer from. Diseases, which is a condition of the living animal or one of its parts that impairs normal functioning and is typically manifested by distinguishing signs and symptoms. Injuries, an act that damages or hurts an external or internal part of the body. And finally, deprivation of physiological needs such as air, water, food, sleep, warmth, excretion, and sex. So those things that can all impair us biologically, affect how we think and reason and how we act and behave. And what are some of the methods for biological healing? Number one is going to a medical doctor. Basically, this is where medical doctors are very generalized, which means that are very specifically. They're very generalized and general and specialized in the area that they're treating. You could have a heart doctor, you could have a neurologist, you could have somebody, an endocrinologist. I'm not as familiar with the medical field, but I know that there's different specialties that medical doctors get into, very specific things of healing and treating you physically. And then the other
Right.
one that's very closely related to that is a DO, or a doctor of osteopathic medicine. And they treat the body as a whole, rather than, like, if you go in for an arm injury, a medical doctor is going to treat your arm. Whereas an osteopath is more going to look at you as a whole, and basically what are some of the other contributing factors and areas to help bring about that healing to that arm through other parts of your body or other areas. And so they can also be very general or specialized, just like a medical doctor. And you were going to comment?
No, that's just agreeing and
Sure.
adding in, and I'm
Sure.
following.
Sure. And then the last thing, or the couple of things, is physical therapists. So if you've ever had a limb or a ligament or a muscle or a bone or ailment of getting you back to a normal level of physical functioning, physical therapists are excellent to help in that healing process.
Right. They're also often used after like a surgery or something like that. If you
Sure.
have some sort of replacement, they'll get you back up to a functioning level.
Yeah. And then dentistry, obviously, if you're having any type of oral or tooth issues, dentistry is important for that biological healing process. And then, of course, counseling and mental health therapy are also valuable, even for things like chronic pain. So, one of the things that we train on in the clinical counseling field is dealing with people who have chronic pain, or people who are going through and seeing a medical doctor, or they're seeing an osteopath for certain things that are going on. Because sometimes the comorbidity of somebody who's dealing with chronic pain can have an effect on depression, have an effect on anxiety, have an effect on stress that goes on in one's life. So having a therapist that you're also able to talk to about some of the things that you're going with can help you better cope with some of the things that might be related to each other in nature.
Gotcha. I didn't know they had trained you in the counseling world over like chronic pain or something like that.
Yeah,
That's
that was actually a major one. Um, we did a skit on it. Actually, called it the chronic pain dating game.
mm,
And we had people like ask questions, and then the people would answer questions according to the different things that they were suffering from chronic pain. And it was a nice skit to really bring awareness to how it impacts and
sure.
impairs one's life and well-being, and how it even might affect somebody who was really in the dating world, and how it can
Right.
have an impact
Absolutely.
on them. People have like fibromyalgia, and other types of things like that, if it's not even a physical or specific injury, and that's one that's like that.
Right. I can definitely like if you have some sort of serious injury or chronic something that keeps coming up and you're trying to attract a mate or something like that, like it definitely, yeah, that'd be. I now that we're talking about it, I haven't thought about it until we had this conversation. So, but now that you mention it, like it would be difficult. Like you're out to dinner, you're out to a movie, or you're trying to create that courting environment in a relationship, and it's like you know, I got to go take care of this, or this is distracting me from this moment that I want to be engaged with this person that I'm attracted to, or whatever. Or even
Sure.
in a even more romantic relationship, though. I guess in some sense there's some benefits to that because that person would know what you deal with, but at the same
Sure.
time, like it can be frustrating. Like I want to go do this, but I can't.
For sure. Absolutely. Like I said, that's why, having that one-on-one conversation with somebody who is objective and for your well-being. It's, friends are great to have, family's great to have. Sometimes counseling and mental health therapy is important to go along with even things like biological healing.
Sure.
So let's get to the next one, which is chemical impairments. Chemical impairments within our body that can impair our a level of functioning are things like hormones. Having hormones out of balance, which is a chemical product of living cells that circulates in body fluids, such as blood, and produces a specific, often stimulatory effect on the activity of cells, usually remote from its point of origin. So again, these chemicals travel through your bodies, and very common ones for men are testosterone. For women, there's estrogen, progesterone. Even though both men and women have all these same chemicals, we have different levels of them based on our physical sex.
Right.
And then, of course, neurotransmitters, which are also chemicals, but these are a chemical substance that transmits nerve impulses across the neural synapses within the brain. These are things like you hear common ones like dopamine and serotonin, and you hear about GABA and norepinephrine and epinephrine. And these different neurotransmitters are the chemicals that usually, when you need something like a psychotropic medication, even if it's something like Tylenol, those are that's the areas that they're affecting in your brain are the neurotransmitters. And yeah, there's medications that are out there that have an impact and effect on your hormones, but primarily it's your neurotransmitters when you're taking some type of psychotropic medication, which we'll get into when we talk more about chemical healing in the next slide. And here we are, chemical healing. So, one of the things that's most common with chemical healing is hormone replacement therapy. And this can come in forms of testosterone and dihydrotestosterone, as well as estrogen and progesterone. Generally, when these things are administered, the most common use of hormone replacement therapy is for the elderly. So as
Mm,
we age and women get into closer to menopause, they have lower levels of progesterone and estrogen, and the lack thereof of those of those hormones within them are affecting behavior, are affecting mood, are affecting how they act and behave, and can sometimes be impairing interpersonal relationships, whether they're at work or with family members, a spouse, their children. So, going to your doctor and getting tested for your hormones and having proper hormone balance or an imbalance, getting tested for these things are important. And of course, as men age as well, our testosterone levels drop and then
Right.
decrease. These things can cause things like impotence, can sit there and cause things like depression. So it's important, especially as you age, to be working with your physical or family doctor to see if these things are impairing or inhibiting things, and you might not be aware of it. You might be like, well, I'm becoming cranky, or I'm becoming irritable, or all of a sudden I'm crying for no reason. It could be that you're having a hormone imbalance, and you need to sit there and go see your medical professional to help you get those things back in balance and get them up to healthy levels.
But I also say, even as I mean, obviously, it affects the older you get, um, the more it becomes a more common issue. But even say, even as you are younger, to not as necessary. It's not as you need to have it happen as often, but have your levels checked. See where you're at. Just it'll give you a bearing of what needs to happen, and work with your medical doctor or your medical professional to, go over how do we treat these things and be aware of them. Because as at least a Sunday league athlete in soccer, like I was talking to this guy who, like, there's I'm not old by any means, but I've definitely noticed there's times where I don't I can't run as fast as I remember. Like, it's just
Mm.
not quite there. And I was talking about it with just a teammate of mine. He's like, I had an uncle like that, and same thing happened to him, and he got his levels checked right around 30, and turns out his testosterone was down. They gave him a little bit of testosterone, and he got right back up to that level. He was competing more at a higher level, so
Sure.
it mattered more to him. But I thought it was interesting that even that young, he was getting his levels checked to see if there was anything that needed to be bumped up a little bit or managed in a way to bring him back up to, obviously, as we age, our ability to compete and run fast and do those physical sports decreases, but he was able to, kind of curtail it a little bit.
Absolutely. No, that's a good example. Appreciate you sharing that.
Sure.
And the next thing is psychotropic medications. And again, when it comes to psychotropic medications, one of the first things, especially when I was doing therapy, is I would try to help clients understand in a layman's way how psychotropic medications work. And the easiest way to explain it is, if you think about the medication pill or whatever it is, if it's an injection or whatever, no matter what you're putting into your body from a medical standpoint, it's basically like a key.
Hmm.
And then if you look at either your neurotransmitters or you look at your hormones and you look at those things as locks.
Hmm.
And they know in the pharmaceutical industry that every pill that's created doesn't help everybody in the same way. Everybody has a different set of locks inside of them. So they
Hmm.
may have this one pill that they know affects dopamine, or that affects serotonin, or affects norepinephrine, or it has an effect that it's supposed to work, but it only works on 60 to 70% of the people's locks. But they can't go look at your locks ahead of time. So they go, hey, we know this one works and it's very common and it has very low level of side effects, and we believe this works and we would like you to take it. Well, it takes roughly 6 doses for, first of all, for it to metabolize in your body.
Hmm.
After that, it's about a 4 to 6 weeks observation of changes in your mood and behavior.
Right.
And those things are the things that you have to report back to your doctor, as well as ask friends and family members for feedback saying, what have you noticed in a change in my behavior, if any? Because what the doctors are trying to get to is it the right pill to unlock the locks in yours that it's supposed to? And number two, is it having a positive effect? Like, is it enough, or is it too much, or is it too little? Because they also don't know, like, if your dopamine levels are supposed to be up here and they're
Hmm.
down here, how much of a dose? And they're basing it on your weight, they're basing it on your age, they're basing it on your sex, but they're still guessing to a degree. They have a good idea of what it does, but it's not 100% guaranteed. That's why sometimes people go through two, three, four, five different types of medications before they find the right one that works for them, because each individual is so unique. So it's important to understand that. The other thing is when it comes to side effects, as these pills or these pharmaceuticals metabolize through your liver, it creates metabolites. And then the metabolites have their own little keys. And
Hmm.
whether they open or unlock certain things in your body creates the side effects. So when it says, hey, this medication is used for this, may cause blah, 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 blah on the commercial, it's potential that those metabolites can create the side effects. So that's just a good way for you to understand when you're taking psychotropic medication, take 6 doses for to metabolize in your body and be baselined, and then 4 to 6 weeks of observation to see what type of change it has in your mood and behavior.
Right. It sounds like what you're saying there is like we've learned a lot about the brain and we know quite a bit about the brain, but it's still so much of a mystery on how to actually apply what we've learned because everybody's so different. Because of that, like if you're on these medications or you're starting a regimen of it or whatever your situation may be actively involved in your healing process. And
Absolutely.
if it's through psychotropic medication, it's through these things. Like we've all heard, we all know the horror stories about it. Be actively involved in that. Speak up. Talk to your therapist or the person prescribing these medications and say it's doing this, and they can work with you better that way. The more information you give them, like
Yep.
it's okay for it to not necessarily work for you, and it's not so much a malicious thing, though. I do believe that pharmaceutical companies kind of are a bit skeevy, but that's a different conversation. However, a lot of it is like there's clinical trials that happen and they get a certain result, but they're still guessing. It's an educated guess. It sounds like what you're saying. It's still a guess, though.
It's a guess because we just don't have enough information about the brain to really know which medications will work for each specific person by looking ahead of time.
Right.
They just don't have that information yet. Maybe somebody will end up developing some type of test or diagnostic that allows them to know, yep, for sure, this person's 100% guaranteed to be benefited by using this type of medications that'll work specific for them. And then here's the dose because here's what their levels are at.
Right. And
You
here's
know,
another thing. This is a kind of a sidebar, a little bit off topic, but just on the clinical trial things, if you ever happen to be a part of those, it is very important that you are honest about what you're feeling and don't try and do it for fun. I only say that because um, when my girlfriend was going through nursing school, they talked about clinical trials, and there are stories of people lying about the side effects they're feeling, and then they have to put them on there, and it can cause confusion down the road for certain people. I'm sure they have ways of filtering stuff out, but at the same time, be honest. If you're a part of one of those, be honest because it will affect many people down the road if it actually goes to market, if it's
well,
approved.
and sometimes when you're in a clinical trial, you're not even getting the real thing. You're getting a sugar pill.
Sure.
So they're looking for placebo effect and people's susceptibility of believing they're getting something that's beneficial actually having the effect on them. So it's part of the trial as well. You don't even know if you're getting it or not.
Right.
And then, yes, pharmaceutical companies are in the business to make money. It's a billion and billions of dollar industry. It doesn't mean it's always malicious,
Sure.
but it's also important that the diagnosis is correct. So, whether you're going to your medical doctor or you're going to a psychiatrist or you're going to a nurse practitioner, when you're dealing with psychotropic medications, especially the ones we're going to discuss coming up that are related to mental disorders or mental illnesses, it's important that you got the right diagnosis, therefore the right treatment, and then therefore, be willing to understand that the first type of medication might not work.
Hmm.
It might work, but it might not work. So it's important to say yes, it is, or no, it isn't, if it is, or if it isn't. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It might be something wrong with the medication.
Right.
So don't be like, oh, it's not working for me. I guess there's something wrong. No, it's not you. It's the medication because it's supposed to have an effect. So if it's
Right.
really not having an effect, it's not working for you.
Right.
So let's go ahead and talk about some of the specific psychotropic medications that are common in treatment for chemical healing.
Sure.
Antipsychotics such as Seroquel and Abilify. These are used primarily to treat what used to be manic depressive disorder is now bipolar disorder. So Those type of things are used, to treat those things. They're also used for patients who are dealing with schizoaffective or schizophrenia. It helps eliminate in hallucinations, delusions, both auditory and visual. Then you have antidepressants such as Celexa, Lexapro, Zoloft, Paxil, Wellbutrin, some of the more common name brands. A lot of these are SSRIs. People have heard that term. It's selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So it's basically blocking off the neuron that's reabsorbing serotonin once it's released. Serotonin is what we called in the clinical field the calming neurotransmitter, whereas dopamine is the one that makes you feel good and makes you feel euphoric. Serotonin is the one that's supposed to make you feel calm in a state of happiness and well-being and just very peacefulness. That's the purpose of what it's supposed to do. However, one of the big things for antidepressants, for however they work, and I don't understand this because I'm not a neurologist, but they can increase thoughts of suicide. So usually, we're taking antidepressants to reduce depression or help people quit smoking. In a lot of these cases, they're taking these things. But it's also increasing thoughts of suicide. And I don't understand quite how this works, but be aware if you do have suicidal ideation and you're taking an antidepressant, is it increasing this thought process within you? If so, these are things that are vitally important to report back to your doctor, your psychiatrist, your nurse practitioner, whoever's treating you, as well as a counselor or therapist if you're seeing a counselor or therapist. And using those hotlines when those things are happening, for like the national hotline, the suicide hotline that's out there, it's important that you seek help immediately when those things start to occur.
Absolutely.
Next one down, we have hypnotics. Hypnotics, people would think, oh, that has to do with people who are doing hypnosis. No, hypnotics are used usually as sleep aids. So basically, they're sleep aids that help you fall asleep, and they simulate sleep within you. The problem with some of the hypnotics that we studied is it can prevent people from getting down into stage 3 and 4 of sleep. So they're just staying more up into stage 1 sleep or REM, and then also stage 2 sleep. But stage 3 and 4 is kind of like where your body starts to twitch, or you start to really get into a deep sleep and you're not waking. There's not lucid dreaming going on in stage 3s and 4, and those things are important for your body to recover. And it's been shown that some side effects of people who are taking hypnotics to help them sleep is they're not getting down into that stage 3 and 4 sleep, which is beneficial to what sleep helps you recover from. Next one, we have mood stabilizers. Those are things like lithium, Depakote, Tegretol. A lot of people are also dealing with bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 disorder are taking mood stabilizers to help even out their state of neurotransmitters in the brain, so they're not bouncing from the either the mania or the hypomania and then down into depression. It's more stabilizing in what's going on within the brain. Again, I'm not a neurologist. I'm just giving you general overviews of what these things do. If you're taking these medications, you should educate yourself, both with your medical professional as well as yourself online. Next are sedatives. A lot of people call these benzos or benzodiazepines because a lot of them are benzodiazepines. Not all of them are benzos, but they're things like Valium, Ativan, Xanax, Klonopin. And a lot of people abuse these for the euphoric effect that can also take place within them when they're using these. Especially, I've heard a lot of people, especially with Valium and Xanax and Klonopin, in abusing those medications. As far as, so be careful because they're addictive in their nature if you like the way that they make you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one is stimulants, and stimulants that they've been using recently to help treat adult ADHD. They have non-stimulant medications for ADHD as well for children and teenagers. The common ones are Ritalin, Adderall, and Vyvanse for adults. They're using guanfacine a lot now, and sometimes they're using guanfacine in relation to a stimulant as well with children. Again, work with your medical doctors, your psychiatrist, or your nurse practitioners if you are needing these to treat ADHD. And one of the things we found with ADHD, and a lot of people think that, ADHD in the United States is overdiagnosed. It's probably not the case. But what we found is once people had the correct stimulant, and this is for the studies I saw with adults, their brains healed and repaired themselves. And a lot
Mm,
of times when you have your neurotransmitters not functioning the way they do, either you have too much or too little going on, it creates problems and atrophy within your brain. Like for people with ADHD, we found that their brain stopped storing memories in the prefrontal cortex and would actually store memories in their occipital lobes and their temporal lobes and other places that were associated with sensory information rather than memories, experiential memories, episodic memories. So
gotcha.
we found that the brain shrinks over time. Like, so if you look at 40, 50, 60 year olds who have untreated ADHD, their brains have shrunk. They have less gray matter, and
Mm,
and that has an effect on things. So if you are diagnosed with these things, don't just think that you can mindfully overcome something. If you're prescribed a medication, you have a sense of well-being, it's because that medication's helping your brain function in the same way that a person that's a diabetic needs insulin. You wouldn't just stop taking your insulin because insulin was working when you're taking it. And some people, when they start taking medication, start to feel normal and feel healthy and feel better and go, oh, I don't need that. I'm good. And they stop
right,
taking it. They look at it as, oh, I don't need this crutch. It's the pill's not a crutch. It's to help something function normal that isn't naturally functioning normal. Just like people have thyroid issues and people have a number of other things that they have to take medications for that are physical in their nature. These things that are dealing with neurotransmitters are very, very important. So
right.
again, if you're going to discontinue use of these, especially because they can have an effect on your heart rate, they can have an effect on your blood pressure. You can't just stop. You can't just quit these things cold turkey. So definitely, if you're wanting to quit or wanting to switch or for whatever reason, work with your medical professionals before you make those decisions on your own. Otherwise, they could have dire physical consequences. So I just want to make sure people understand that that's very serious stuff when it comes to this psychotropic medications.
Sure, and I think, like, now there's a lot of the stigma of that is it's definitely less, than it has been. I'm just basing that off on just there's a lot more information about mental illness out there and all these mental disorders that, people deal with.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if it's definitely a situation where you don't wanna believe you need a crutch or anything, like, it's just not a not a good thought to have, and it's okay to be on these things. It's no different than being on, like John said, an insulin shot or anything like that. And we should continue to remove stigma around taking psychotropic medication and all of that stuff because it has its benefits and it has its place, and it's amazing that we are able to develop things that can help people in this area. And one thing I want to go back to, and this might be a little bit in the weeds for what we want to cover in this particular teaching, but in adult ADHD, you mentioned like their brains kind of, it, correct me if I'm wrong here, but kind of grow out of it. Is
Well,
that
it's
is that
almost
kind of
it's,
the term?
well, it's like there's atrophy in their brain when it's untreated, and then when it's treated with a stimulant, the brain heals and repairs itself.
Did you have you noticed anything in like children at all where the same thing happens?
Well, the studies that we did were for adults. They weren't for children
Okay.
that were on ADHD because a lot of the stimulants that were working did work for teenagers, but not as well. And since guanfacine became more popular and was showing some effectiveness with children, especially ones that are in K through 8,
Mm,
more effectiveness. Whereas with the 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 year olds, that the stimulants were more beneficial than things like guanfacine or using guanfacine in conjunction with a stimulant.
gotcha. Okay.
But I
I
didn't
just
I didn't see any brain studies that were done in terms of like MRI imaging like we did with the adult studies.
I see. I see. The only reason I asked is just like I think we've had the conversation like in our breakfast brother type thing, but I remember, and this might have been bad information at the time. It was way back in like 2008, so I long time ago in terms of medical terms and where we've come and all that. But I remember being told having to go through some testing for something I wanted to do or wanted to fly at the time, and I needed to go over that I didn't have or need the ADHD medication because the FAA at the time didn't you couldn't get your license if that was the case.
Right.
Obvious reasons you need to be able to concentrate when you're flying an airplane. So um but basically, the guy I met with ultimately cleared me and said, people fall into a couple categories where they can grow out of it. One of them was they can grow out of it as children.
Mm.
Again, this is back in 2008, 2009. So I'm not sure what any of the what it says now. That's just what I was told as a 18-year-old.
Yeah, like when it comes down to psychotropic medication, like if somebody's doing a sedative because they're dealing with anxiety, or if they're dealing with taking an antidepressant like Zoloft or Wellbutrin because they're dealing with depression, there's a difference between dealing with like a major depressive episode and dealing with bipolar 1 or 2 disorder, to where
Mm.
there's specific high levels of mood swing between mania and depression, or hypomania and depression. Those are usually chemical imbalances that are lifelong things and require lifelong treatment of psychotropic
Mhm.
medication. Whereas if somebody's dealing with depression because of an episode or an event that occurred in their life, but their brain's functioning normally otherwise, then the antidepressant or the sedative could be beneficial for a period of time.
Gotcha.
But they should still, when you're talking about use and discontinuing use, working with your medical professional to make sure you're not harming yourself or
Right.
affecting something negatively.
I
And to
see.
say, so there's like for ADHD, if you have ADHD in your adult life, it's to me a lifelong thing. You probably
Gotcha.
should be taking medication and working with your, like I said, nurse practitioner, medical doctor, or psychiatrist long term. Same thing with bipolar 1 or 2. Same thing with schizophrenia, schizoaffective. There's just certain diagnoses that are not just cognitive or experiential or emotional in their nature, and you're just having a difficult time coping with it because you have a specific cognitive framework or a certain traumas happened that's impaired normal functioning. Usually people are struggling with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, schizoaffective, and the last one I mentioned was sorry, it's not ADHD. Those things are chemical imbalances in your neurotransmitters and require medication by a trained and certified medical professional. Like I said, family doctor, DO or MD, psychiatrist, which is also a medical doctor, but also focusing in terms of psychopathy, and also third one, a nurse practitioner, which is a master level practitioner, trained for this specific type of treatment.
Right. Okay. I
Moving on,
didn't.
moving
Yeah,
on.
again, we should move on. That's a little bit deep in the weeds, but I
No,
thought it
that's
was a
okay. No,
valid
absolutely.
question.
No, that's absolutely a good point to bring up, because if you have that question, other people have questions. So it's very
Sure.
good. Going on to experiential impairments. So we've already talked about biological. Now we talked about the chemical, and now we're going to get into experiential impairments that affect us. These things are neglect, which is to give little attention to, things like love, encouragement, education, discipline. And then abuse, which is to treat one unjustly, improperly, or intemperately, mentally, emotionally, physically, and sexually. So, again, whether you've been neglected or abused in any way, these things can create experiential impairments that cause triggers within us when we're reminded of these traumas or horrific or horrible experiences that we've had in the past that were either neglectful or abusive in their nature. The nice thing is there's healing for even these things so that you can be free from these traumas or these horrific situations that have happened in your past. Number one, when they happen to you, nobody ever expects usually that, oh, I'm going to be abused or I'm going to be neglected. It just happens. And it's usually
Right.
done by somebody who has some serious issues themselves. And it wasn't your fault. It wasn't your responsibility that you were abused or neglected, whether you were a child or an adult. So I want to make that perfectly clear when we're discussing these things. It's not about fault. It's not about blame. We don't victim shame here, regardless of what anybody may believe based on the words that we're choosing to use in terms of our abilities to heal from these things. So listen specifically to what's being said because it can be very beneficial to your well being long term. And again, if somebody's neglecting you, it means they're withholding or not giving love and encouragement and education and discipline, whether as a child. And discipline doesn't mean punishment. Discipline is about training. Discipline
Mm,
is about learning something of value that's a discipline. Just like when somebody goes to learn martial arts, it's a discipline. Somebody goes to learn a trade or a craft, it's a discipline. Somebody goes into a specific field, getting a bachelor's, master's, and PhD in it, it's a discipline. Okay, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about punishment. So if we're neglected of those things, they can have an impairment on our experiential functioning. They can cause things for people who have anxiety disorders and depressive disorders and stress disorders. So again, these things we're going to talk about in the next slide are how to heal from those. And then whether you've been abused mentally and emotionally, physically, sexually, you can still heal from those things as well. And we're going to get into how. And then, the last part was loss, which is loss comes in several different forms. You can have loss in terms of relationship, because let's say you're a kid and your best friend moves away and you never see him again. There can be a feeling of loss there. You can break up with a boyfriend or girlfriend. That can be loss. You can get divorced. There's a loss. You could lose a loved one to death. That's a loss. There's losses anytime that there's been a level of relationship and then there's no more relationship for whatever reason. And then there's healthy and unhealthy ways of coping with loss, healthy and unhealthy ways of coping with abuse, healthy and unhealthy ways of coping with neglect. And again, a lot of times people are putting band-aids on these things rather than truly helping people heal. We're going to try to give you some foundational things that, again, take practice, take time
sure.
to sit there and learn to incorporate, because we've been given a certain set of coping skills through our observations as children, our observations as teenagers, and our observations as adults. Plus we've been fed information about here's how you deal with this, and here's how you deal with this loss, and here's how you deal with this abuse, and here's how you deal with this physical stuff, and this mental stuff, and this emotional stuff, and this lack of love or encouragement, or you've been belittled and put down, whatever it is. You had a certain way of coping with it, and that coping with it helped you survive. But it doesn't always mean it's helping you thrive. It doesn't mean that you're healing from it. Putting up a rigid wall and acting tough is not a healing method, it's a coping method. And while it may help you survive, it doesn't help you be free from it. We're trying to help you have that experiential healing that's lifelong, forever.
Right.
So let's go ahead and get into the steps of that. Number one is understanding, which means that understanding that human beings are always doing the best they can in any given moment. And that's a difficult concept for a lot of people to understand. But we live very deterministic lives. People are always doing the best they can and what they're capable of based on biological, experiential, cognitive, and emotional impairments. So if people are biologically, cognitively, experientially, and emotionally impaired, they do things that are neglectful and abusive in their nature toward others. And it's not about that fault and blame. Yes, they have responsibility for it, but it couldn't be any different than it was. And a lot of times when people are having difficulty coping with the things negatively that have happened to them, it's because they believe somebody could have done something different. And that's one of the things that they get hung up on. So unless you have understanding that that situation could not have been any different, then you're going to have difficulty moving on to the next steps, which get into empathy, the mental and emotional empathy, as well as humility, because these things are necessary steps in experiential healing. So experiential understanding of people are always doing the best they can, and it could not be any different than it was in that moment. Again, what that person did, even though it was done to you, was really about them and their impairments. Hurting people hurt others, and unhealthy people do unhealthy things. So realize that whatever was done to you had more to do with them and what was wrong and screwed up inside of them than it ever did to do with you. And that situation that occurred is horrific, it's traumatic, it's negative in its nature, and it's not your fault that those assailant things occurred to you as a victim in that moment. But if you don't understand that that person is a screwed up individual that couldn't have done anything different, then you're going to harbor things like bitterness and resentment, hate, rage. And those type of states of feeling and states of being don't serve your healing path very well. If you've
right,
ever talked to people who have grown and healed from things, they've gotten to a sense of having an empathetic viewpoint, a cognitive and an emotional viewpoint of going, that person, something horrific must have happened to them or is happening in them that's causing them to behave poorly in the way that it does. It doesn't condone what they did. It doesn't make what they did okay. It doesn't excuse what they did. But it could not have been different in that moment because of whatever biological, cognitive, experiential, and emotional impairments that were going on inside that individual. So if you don't have that empathetic view, you're going to become very bitter and resentful and angry, and that's going to impair your healing process in your inner state of being. And then you're doing yourself a disservice. And believe me, I get how the world's taught you to do those things, to be bitter, to harbor anger, that righteous anger or that righteous indignation towards somebody of, making people into monsters and assailants and horrific people. But those things do not benefit your healing of those things.
right. If
So,
they did, you wouldn't be struggling in the way you struggle with,
sure.
or the world wouldn't be struggling the way it struggles with healing, and we wouldn't be as reactive as we are as a society in 2019 America. Whenever
Yeah.
you're watching this,
So again, along with that empathy comes the humility. And here's a very difficult piece for a lot of people. They lack humility, which means if you were the assailant, which means you grew up in their environment and you had their biological state of being and you had all the things horrible happen to them and those things happen to you, you would do exactly what they do. If you were another human being in their biological, cognitive, experiential, and emotional state of being in that specific moment of time, you would have done what they did.
right? I know oftentimes we like to say, "Well, I'd never do that," and the answer is, "Well, of course you wouldn't do that, but you're not them either." And these we talked about it before, but these concepts seem simple, but they're hard to implement, and a lot of people don't
Because the
accept
world doesn't teach them to do that. The world teaches them,
that.
to be bitter and be resentful and be angry and
Oh,
have
you have a right to be angry about that, whatever X is, but
I would hate them too.
right,
But those things never served you any good. And those are part of the things that are impairing your ability to heal, is because you harbor those things because you were taught by somebody to feel those things, to be in that state of being as a protective mechanism, but it was really an impairing mechanism.
right.
So
And
again, that humility piece and the empathetic piece are hugely important for the next piece, which is forgiveness.
mhm,
And forgiveness generally has two definitions. We're talking about the forgiveness of one of them. Forgiveness can be to excuse or condone somebody's behavior. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about that type of forgiveness. We're talking about the forgiveness of letting go of the bitterness and resentment that you feel towards the assailant and wishing that moment in the past was different. If you ruminate about things in that way, you will not forgive. And if you do not forgive, you do not heal.
right. You talk to anyone, back to John's point, that has gone through a healing process, they will mention a element of forgiveness. They might not necessarily use those words, but they will talk about, eventually I just let go of the anger I had, or phrases like that you will hear. And that is part of the process which allowed them to move past that moment.
Yeah,
Again, I can't stress this enough. John has already covered this multiple times throughout this teaching. It does not mean that you say, "Nope, it's okay. That's cool what you did."
no,
Not
it's not
at
okay
all.
what they did
It's 100% not okay what they did that was abusive,
or
or
neglectful.
neglectful or whatever. But it is requires an element of letting go. And I know
But
there's
it's not letting go as far as a choice. This state of being understanding and cognitively and emotionally empathetic and having a persona and state of being of humility and that forgiveness that comes natural from those things It's not a choice to forgive. It's not an action. Forgiveness is not an action. Forgiveness is not a choice. Forgiveness is not a fucking declaration. Saying I forgive you doesn't matter if you don't have it in your inner state of being, of letting go of the bitterness, letting go of the resentment, because it's not there. You don't feel bitterness. You don't feel resentment because you don't feel that way towards any human beings, no matter what they do, because of the understanding, empathy, and humility that go along with your state of being and how you view yourself and others. So
Sure.
that's
And
what we want to get to, is
right.
it's not
They
a
all
choice.
they all ultimately build on one another. Like if you have understanding that it can't be different and that it was always going to be that way, and then it leads to an empathetic viewpoint. If it was always going to be that way, and if I had lived that person's life, I would be doing that same thing. That leads to humility. That automatically transitions to that humility, which can be summed up with no one's better or worse than anybody else. Again, simple concept, but not really taught very well.
And these things are for your state of being. They're not for the assailant.
Right.
You're not supposed to go up to tell the assailant, I understand. You're not going up to the assailant and say, oh, I have emotional and cognitive empathy for you. Or you go, you know what, I'm no better or worse than you because let me demonstrate my humility. Or, you know what, I forgive you for what you did to me. That's not necessary. That's just all
Right.
bullshit worldly crap. I'm
And
not
it's
talking about that. And you don't need somebody else to say they're sorry to you for you to heal. None of these things that we're saying is somebody needs to come up to you and say, I'm sorry that I was abusive or neglectful to you. You're not a slave to them anymore when you look at things in this understanding and empathetic and humility and forgiving way. It's not necessary. You don't need them to be sorry. They may be too fucked up to be sorry. They may be too unhealthy to be sorry. They may be dead and can't say they're sorry.
right.
You don't need that. What you need is understanding that leads to cognitive and emotional empathy. It means you see the world through somebody else's viewpoint and realize they couldn't do anything different. You have humility because you realize if you were in their shoes, you'd be them. And if they were in your shoes, they'd be you. And therefore, the resentment and the bitterness let go. You don't feel it anymore. You realize couldn't have been any different. I don't need to harbor this bitterness and resentment because people are always like, oh, if I don't hold somebody accountable and I don't sit there and hold somebody responsible or punish them, they'll just get away with it. People
Right.
can't run away from themselves.
They have
If
to
they
live
are
with
so
that.
screwed up in their cognitive, experiential, biological, and emotional well-being, they are stuck within that framework.
Right.
That is not freedom. That is torment in a state of existence that's very damaging and unhealthy to that person. People can't run away from themselves. They're stuck with them. So if their state of being that would do something that horrific, they're stuck in that torment and that toil within themselves. So nobody's getting away with anything, just so you know.
Right. And then another thing I've heard as well is just like, well, what if you have something that you don't feel like? I know certain serial killers, they have a hard time processing the right and wrong. They don't feel that, I guess, remorse or something. There's something in their mind that causes them to not be able to feel that as well as a normal person. And even in that case, where maybe they don't even feel bad, they still have to live in a world where they're not feeling bad and it affects literally everything around them.
Yeah.
How bad of an existence does that have to be?
Yeah.
Thank I mean, it's great that you don't have to struggle with it. It sucks what happened to you, and yes, but quit ruminating and, "Oh, it sucks that it happened to me."
No,
I'll
you
be
can't
harsh on that and
yeah,
say,
you can't live
"Hold
in
on,
a
hold on,
victim
hold on."
mentality and expect to heal.
Yeah, to quit living in the "it sucks, woe is me." It sucks that it happened. Absolutely.
For
There is a
sure.
moment for "it sucks that it happened," but to continue in that victim mentality and say, "Oh, it sucks that it happened, it sucks as it happened," stunts your growth, and you'll always struggle with that.
Again, these things are for your freedom and your well being inside you so that your state of being and your state of feeling are healthy in their nature. We're giving you the tools and the skills to do this. You're not going to, this is not a step by step where you're like, oh, step one, I'm going to
Right.
understand. Step two, I'm going to empathize. Step three, I'm going to have humility. No, these changes take time. Because a lot of times, even when I was talking to Patrick as we were going through these things, it was like, well, how do I do this? I don't feel this way. And it'd be like, well, how are you looking at that? What are your thoughts? What are your judgments? What are your perceptions? And I'm like, have you looked at it this way? Have you considered looking at that person this way? Well, no, I haven't, John. That's it. There's a certain perspective that, like I said, there is a cognitive piece that goes into this experiential healing piece. But if you don't get this and it doesn't make sense to you, it's not going to work from you and you're not going to heal. You may be able to cope with what happened to you. I'm not saying you can't, but you're not going to heal. You
Right.
can't say that you're healing. You're just not. You're just always going to be a slave to it. You're always going to be a slave to what somebody else did to you. This is freeing you from that emotional and cognitive slavery. I always say emotional slavery, which means that other people dictate how you feel. Cognitive
Right.
slavery, people dictate your state of being on what they do. I'm free from those things. Patrick's free from those things. It takes time in reprocessing how you view yourself and how you view others. But once you do it, the healing's there, the peace is there, the contentment's there, the patience is there. It just takes time to, again, unplug from the way the world does things and plug into these healthy states of being. They take time because you've been
Yeah.
taught and you've observed an unhealthy and wrong way of dealing with it. Yes, it's helped you survive, not denying that, but then you're still stuck within that same state of framework and being that's been so debilitating, probably up to this point if you're still struggling with it.
Right. And then I think that the point you make there bears going into this. Like, this process takes multiple, like you said, it's not a understanding and then step two this. It's like a step by step. It's going to take multiple, you might take multiple times reflecting on a certain situation. And again, not to ruminate in it, I'll bring back the practice positivity. When you go in to start doing this, it's not to I'm I'm ruminating in this and I'm gonna really just it's to I want to heal from this. And you need to go in with the right mindset of I'm gonna become better from this. I'm going to heal from this eventually and instill that sense of hope in yourself before you start this. Otherwise you do end up in a negative spiral and that's not good either. But it
No.
is going to take multiple times, I think, reflecting on a situation and maybe facing, if it's on the extreme end of abuse, it's not facing those situations again at all. But it is going to take multiple times and time put, like we mentioned in our uh, uh, the time teaching we did. It's going to take making it a priority to reflect on these things, making it a priority to go over these things and really try and gain that understanding and have that become a part of you.
Yep, absolutely. And with that, we'll go ahead and close out this teaching. Thanks again for being here, Patrick. As always, is a pleasure working
Of
with you
course.
and talking with you. As this channel grows and things pick up, we'll start to do live shows. But right now, we're just getting content out here on the channel. We hope this has been beneficial to you. Go ahead and come back next Friday, where we're going to get into building self esteem and self worth and self confidence. And again, just another building stone and a building block of unplugging from that worldly way of thinking and plugging into a healthy way of being and living. So
Absolutely.
until then, just keep becoming a better version of yourself. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.